So my name is Shanice. I am from Sisters in Sound. I'm the New York lead. I am one of the co-hosts of the event. I'm going to have Georgie introduce herself.
Thank you. Hi. I'm Georgie, and I co-run Liminal with Philosophy, aka Andrew, who is over there. And we are a local collective that celebrates the dark and groovy sounds a la Sammy Legs. And looking forward to his masterclass today, so I'll let him introduce himself.
Hello. Whoa, cool. Hey, I'm Sammy Legs. I have been writing music pretty seriously for over a decade. Not seriously, maybe 13, 14 years. DJing about the same. I have ran, I guess now 5 different aliases, 3 active currently. Done like a live electronic band, live like burlesque, electro swing, funk band. The Sammy Legs project sort of started in more of the tech house world, kind of the Dirty Bird sound, which is what I came up on the West Coast. Sort of discovered psychedelic techno and older minimal genres that kind of took my sound in a different direction. I also have like a up-tempo bass. I really like drum and bass and breakbeat and all that. So I'm kind of like all over the spectrum. Afterwards, I'm more than happy to answer questions on like specific genres, aliases, kind of like that whole web of confusion, because it definitely can be annoying figuring out A, what even is your sound, and B, like how to market that, what it looks like. But yeah, I figure we'll keep this organized with where my sound is currently at, and kind of go through, like we'll walk through kind of the approach on one of my most popular songs, sort of like how that was created. To start, just it seems like we have sort of like a wide range of skill levels, and so I figure at a glance first, it's helpful maybe just to see, how a track gets started, when to sort of take it to different stages of development, and that's going to be kind of DAW agnostic, and then I'll kind of like start to get more into what I do in Ableton, which is some things specifically in Ableton, some not. I'll note which are which, and try and keep more stuff that are DAW agnostic, so it's helpful for everyone, even if they aren't normally in Ableton, though that is my girlfriend that I spend more time with than anybody, so certainly my DAW of choice, which I think has a lot of cool tools in it. So just to get started, I was going to go through kind of the trajectory for how I made On Your Mind, which is off of one of my most recent EPs, and I have gotten more organized over the years with the way that I approach things, and so I try and work smarter, not harder, to get a better result, especially because my music sometimes gets pretty complicated. So if you guys are unfamiliar with the song, let me just pull it up real quick, and then I'll show you where we go from there. This is on Digital Structures, which is a SciTech label that was originally Minilogs label, started over 25 years ago, got moved to Perfect Stranger about 20 years ago. They have a very eclectic and cool discography. So yeah, I'll just kind of like hop to the main part, and then we can sort of walk through some steps on how this happened. And it looks like the audio is not audible, though it's coming out of my master. Brief technical difficulty.
Scratching at your window, tickle in your ears.
So I should note, this song is about like roughly 3 parts to it. The one I just played, you could think of it as like the verse. Some people would think of it as a chorus, depending on what your background is in songwriting. Next part I think of as kind of like a bridge where I'm just messing with the sounds from the verse, which is this one.
She's on your mind.
Cool. Yeah. So that is the second section-ish. I'm only denoting these because it helps with when we talk about arranging. And then I have a more synthy section where the vocal's gone.
On your mind. She's on your mind. She's on your mind.
Yeah. So that's kind of basic structure. I went to music school for a year after college, and it was interesting. It's kind of it was Icon Collective in LA, and I'd say a lot of the students and teachers were more in kind of like the bass music, EDM world, but there were also some really valuable mentors who were more in like the pop songwriting world, which is an surprisingly technical world, arguably more so than like these sort of heady engineering psychedelic genres that people think are more technical. And I'd say that I got a lot of sort of important takeaways from the way pop is structured, sort of in that like there is general sections to a song, even good dance tracks that seemingly are just like a minimal groover that kind of can apply similarly to a pop structure, one of which is a verse. Specifically, I like to use vocals a lot. My first 2 projects weren't Sammy Legs. They were writing for other singer-songwriters, and so I've spent a lot of time sort of figuring that side out and trying to apply that to something more minimal like this. I've learned to really let the vocal drive the track, which I don't necessarily have at the onset of it, right? Some of this stuff is done remotely. In this song it is. I was back in Seattle over COVID, and so I was trying to really hone in on getting something that is effective, short, and minimal, that is like groovy enough, that can kind of inspire a vocalist, but I didn't know who I was gonna work with yet. So it took me about like a day or something of really sort of going into the weeds on just basic groove, but this is what I started with. Here, let's see. It's technically longer, but it's basically just a loop. Whoop. So I just have like a 16th note bass line with a kick. And you'll hear that I recorded myself doing a vocal take that's essentially in like the places that I wanted it, and also the tonality. Tonality was important specifically for the vocalist I wanted to work with, Scarlett, because she can be somewhat monotone in her delivery, which is cool. But a pop trope, for instance, is in a verse structure, especially one that has space like this, to do sort of question-answer format. Not that what the words are saying are question and an answer, but having your intonation go up in the first half, intonation going down in the second half, up in the third, down in the fourth. So you kind of get these resolves at the end of 4 and 8 where you're like finishing a sentence. It's like English intonation 101 applied to songwriting. You can do this with melody structure too, right? Having a melody finish on a higher note, second time ends on either like the 1 of the key or the 5th, but moving downward. So sent this to her, my friend Scarlett, and had her re-record. And a big part of working with vocalists in this style in particular is that I don't necessarily want the vocal to feel like it's a big, constant kind of like poppy presence in the song. So I actually need the vocal really early on because that allows me to use it to construct drums and ambience using the vocal. Not that it's necessarily obvious in the end result. We're gonna look at like the layers of the song, which are actually like pretty simple, which helps. But basically at this step, get her to record some takes. First thing I'll do is nothing creative at all. I just get it like louder, fuller, mixed more. We can sort of talk about an easy vocal chain, but I don't want to go that deep yet. Essentially, EQ and compression is the important stuff. And then I go straight into placing it, picking out the best takes, which typically I follow emotion more than pronunciation of words and stuff. It tends to be better, in my experience, if the emotion is there, even if they like actually don't pronounce the word correctly or something. And then I will cut it up a bunch. So the drums in this song are like, it's literally a off hat, which is, let's see, let's look at the drums. I'll turn this up. Look at just a quick clipping chain. If you are in Ableton, I tend to not use an actual master chain when I'm jamming, but I like the soft clip in Ableton. They bought it from Cytomic, a really good VST, and it just sounds nice. Sounds a lot better than the Ableton limiter. So I got like this little impact from her voice, which is like right after she says a word, you can get some breath, like in the moment after. A little tonal hit. And the hat that itself, there's a small noise layer that is just like a normal drum sample, but there's 3 different versions of her pronouncing T's or S's that are also in the hat, which generally are great layers for noisy drums, right? B's, D's, K's are great for more of a perk frequency. T's, S's are great for hats. And the breath that follows what they say is great for like impacts, reverb hits, stuff like that. So often I'll just start kind of like chopping up tiny bits of their voice. I think I have another song that is actually more obvious with this. I quite like this one. It's very different, but we'll be going on a forthcoming, more musical album. Will this come through? Yeah. So listen to just the drums in this intro. I'm pretty sure all of the drums are her voice. Other than I think that hat. So hats, generally, it's nice to have like at least a layer that has like proper noise that's louder. Same with claps, getting like a nice transient, and then you can like think of these as like vibe layers. But her voice doesn't come in for a while. But you'll notice it's a minute in and you kind of know what her voice sounds like. there's also like an ambience layer in the back, which also her voice is just sick in this. I'm gonna listen to this for a sec.
Tides are rising, love, the moon is back. You know I've been trying to keep track of the good times.
She's so good. It's crazy. But yeah, so this one was probably in the more extreme end of the spectrum where I'm like using her voice for like all of it and for something more organic house vibe that works. But you kind of need a couple more layers, I'd say, for something more like driving and techno-y. So yeah, so that would be like early stage. I started building these layers up, and then because I was trying to keep it especially kind of just like groover minimal, I have like a bunch of these little ghost loops that I was putting together with her voice, which are really not noticeable in the song unless you're paying attention. So this is also her voice, but it basically functions as a perk layer. So in the actual production, it's that one. And it sounds like basically I started with just this simple one. And there's actually, you can sort of hear that there's like two different layers of, essentially one is pitching up and the other is staying static. So if I were to do this in Ableton, I could like duplicate it out, cut one, and in Ableton you can automate the pitch envelopes. So a lot of my like sort of risery effect stuff is maybe just like, I think it feels a little tropey if like everything pitches up or down. I don't really like big build-up drums or any of that, but you can sort of achieve a more like subtle version of that if you keep essentially one dry layer that's just like doing the thing over and over, and then a second one that is, say, rising in pitch. So it would sound like this if we were doing it. And we'll have the transposition go up. This is the pitch layer. So on its own, you can hear kind of it rising and having a second layer that sort of just keeps the original perk going. So that's a really simple trick to create energy. And from a rhythmic perspective, I look at these sort of like more groover tracks. I kind of like more of the house side of it. Obviously, there's sort of different approaches with sort of a techno groove. But this one, it's got just the boots and cats. And I found that you get pretty good results with your perk loop ideas if I start them as doing something for a couple of the 16th notes in the first two kicks of a bar. A bar is 4 kicks, 4 quarter notes, and then say duplicate it out once and maybe like delete one note or something like this. But the general idea is like you get almost all of my core groove elements that aren't just like a boots and cats type thing. They follow like a half bar groove is how I'd look at it. And so if I want it to be a full bar, I'll like duplicate it out, maybe delete one note. If I want it to be a 2-bar idea, duplicate that out, maybe again, I'll move this note over or something. And then we get a slightly more varied version of still just a 2-quarter note idea. But generally the like core motifs in this sound is just 2 kicks and it repeats. And I like a lot of tracks that follow that. So like this sounds basically like it is just looping that 2 kick idea, but there's slight variation, and that does a lot. That there's something sort of hypnotic about it because it is following this like basic thing, but it's not always the same. That's a really good way to look at creating hypnotic music. Is there is a motif. It's, always hitting this one note every 2 kicks, but then there's a couple other notes on the side that like it sometimes does, and it could be random or it could be looped over a longer time scale. But the core groove in this track is like pretty simple. It's like not that long in terms of looping. And then I got another vocal chop here, which is way more simple. Starts as just kind of like a perk sound. I'm sure this looks like a B. I just know kind of what those look like, but a B tends to look kind of like a tom. It's just like a low bass drum. And there's also her just going like, which just slowly comes in over time. And it sounds like I'm doing one thing that's a little more heady in this part. This is a little on the advanced side, but like you can have a delay. You'd actually experience this with when you're DJing. If you just set it to like echo and bring the milliseconds down to like say 12 milliseconds or something, that's gonna play like an E note. So you could like make the song ring in E. It could be F, something like that. So like I have this sound. If I were to recreate it live, you could do like a delay, which is in any DAW. But for some reason, this isn't pulling up the right one. Yep. So I'll just turn off sync in Ableton, which goes to, say, I'm gonna guess I think the song's in D, so it's like probably like, I don't know, we can just listen. So I could have that automate in over time, right? Like it starts as just a simple drum, and then let me just isolate here. If I were to automate this, and I can bring the milliseconds down. Which is another way to pitch something down, right? I'm not messing with the audio at all. I'm doing this with a delay. And yeah, it's also just a very fun effect to do while you're DJing live. A lot of my like right before drop stuff, I mess with that. And I've memorized a couple of the milliseconds because most of my tracks are kind of like in D and E and F, and there is a millisecond number that applies to that. And don't worry, the math isn't that bad. Once you know one, say it's 12, if you divide it by 2, it's going to be an octave higher. Or if you multiply it by 2, it'll be an octave lower. So if we listen to 12, sorry, just this one, and then I go to 24, now it's like the octave below. If it's 6, if you want to be a little more complicated, if you multiply it by 1.5, it's a fifth. So E would go to B or something, which is 7 steps. Yeah, so that's a fun trick. And again, thus far, all I've used is tiny bits of her voice for like virtually everything. And that's sort of why I wanted to really just make a nice kick and bass groove to start the track, because I knew that it would be more tight to have all of the sort of auxiliary elements come from the vocal. In reality, it's like, it's not the wand, it's the wizard. You could use anything to be the source material for this stuff, right? But the more you can do to have that source material come from a singular or just like a couple sources, the more it's gonna like glue your whole track together, make everything feel very cohesive. And then if you do have like a big lead synth or lead vocal later, sort of like in that more melodic song, it doesn't feel like it came out of nowhere. And you don't actually even know why, because these things aren't obvious until I like break them down into composite parts. But yeah, so these are most of the basic components. Again, I have like a couple. This little synth guy here is a simple thing in operator. I can walk through, but the general idea is it's a sine wave dropping in pitch and then reverb. The coolest part about this sound is the end of it, which is this. And I do all these things backwards. So like, say I make a loop like this on a synth. We can talk about how to do that. But then I'll spend a lot more time on how it gets to a really simple sound. So it's kind of like doing a maze, like drawing a maze from the inside out, you know? Like it's like I know where it's going. And actually, I like when it goes somewhere quite simple, but it starts somewhere much more complex. And I'd say that creatively, it's much easier to do that backwards. So like, it starts all crazy, but I didn't write it like this, right? I wrote this first part, and then I was like, okay, well, I could like pitch it way up at the beginning and add reverb, but then it snaps in. Sounds a lot cooler that way, right? Generally for like minimal music, it's like kind of surprising what the lead sound is, because it's like annoyingly simple at times. It's like, why is this good? And it's often more like the journey it took to get there. There was one song from back in the day that is ridiculously named, called Chinese Cheese Balls by Grouch. And I remember this is before I didn't really understood like psychedelic sound design, and I just like kept listening to the song, was so confused. The intro's, it's short, but yeah, important. Just track this very trippy sound and hear what it becomes at the drop. It's literally just the conga drum, which is a cool conga drum, mind you. But it's like not that crazy. It's about like, it's like a bar conga loop essentially, but it's all this shit before that makes it a lot cooler. And he has like a whole XY pad. He has his own way of doing it, but I think the general idea applies the same. You can come up with your own effects that you enjoy, but sort of taking that crazy journey at the beginning and then snapping it into a really simple concept at a drop allows for you to get that like minimalism and payoff without you having to do like some cheesy tech house horn or something, which, as you can tell, I have bias about from past years of doing that. So yeah, any thoughts, questions on kind of like this first bit? Are you finding this helpful? Is this kind of like interesting to break down these bits? Yeah, Georgie? Yeah. Honestly, yeah. Let's just try doing a little bit of that right now, because I have the. It's not necessarily how I would do it, because I have the like, I think like mixed vocal here. Hold on, let me just find it.
Breathing down your neck.
Yeah, so I'll just like take this and kind of go through roughly what I would do. So imagine this is more of like the raw take that I just like mix down so it's loud, so I can do more stuff with it. This one's more affected. So like,
Gotcha.
This is scratching at your window.
Scratching at your window.
So we got an S. This is a good hat. So I could take like just part of the S. Say, I'm doing this roughly. We have a K, scratch, cr,
Scratch.
which is not a perfect K because of the processing I did, but you can see it really starts right here. Generally, if I'm doing vocals and I have something like a K, I'll have them land like before the one a little bit, otherwise the kick will get rid of it. So let's say we just take this little K.
Net.
That's basically like a perk, right? It could be a clap, depending on your, I don't know, cultural views on perks versus claps.
Net. Net.
So like
Net.
right here, I'd consider this like a tonal chop because it's just like kind of like a clean note. There's technically another pitched. I think she has like an octave under her voice here, but that could be like my. I think in this song I kind of was oscillating between like. I'd have it like say every quarter note. I'm spitballing first, and then we'll like look at these after.
Joe. Joe.
This is a cha. Cha also a good hat. Slightly different than a S or a T. They're called fricatives. You're a linguistics person. They're like noise parts of our pronunciation. So we got honestly, I like this. This is like more of like a metal hat. And then this is more of like a drum machine hat. So we could, for instance, even just like have these two looping. Say we like spread one a little to the left, one a little bit to the right. This is like, I actually don't know what this hat sounds like. This one I did higher, it sounds like. But that also helps to have like another hat layer that's like more of a real drum. And then let's see what else we got in here. I'll just skip to another one. Like we got another little, maybe instead of doing it as like just a little ka, we can have it be a little bit more of like a ka with a tonal perk. So I could like make it like, yeah. I actually think that might literally be what the. All right, cool. It doesn't matter. I think I did literally take that piece, so this will be a good example. Nice. Live examples are always kind of like, maybe it'll work. Yeah. So I'm just spitballing here, but I'm just kind of showing you a general like structure, right? So we have say we have like a K, perk. Don't read into that. Lead chop. So we got this. Yep. We got a little click. We got like a tonal K thing, and then the hats. So we'll just like group all these, solo them, so we're not listening to the rest of it. Let's say we put this one over here. So it's already sounding like kind of cool, but I sort of like breezed through like where I was placing this stuff. So this goes back to that thing of like the more like minimal groove, having like a nice like half bar, and maybe like duplicate and get like a full bar. Like I'm literally just having this play on the kick right now. So I have something that plays every quarter note. So you just duplicate it every quarter note. And then maybe you set up something that happens every 2 quarter notes, duplicate that out. And maybe I could just like move it over one the next time. So like, let's see. And this one only happens once every 4 quarter notes. So we got something that happens every quarter note, every 2, every 4. Say we just duplicate this out once, and I like have this guy happen one more time, and I'll just take the K, so it's like not tonal. And now you got kind of like a 2-bar loop. Oh, I gotta duplicate the other short. Yeah. So in terms of like Georgie's question, like processing, a lot of this stuff that I'll do in this stage is not that complicated. Like, for instance, simple echo. For instance, on this one that's playing on the kick all the time, let's bring in like a kick and bass. Boop. So I'll just put like, I like echo a little more than the normal delay, but you could look at them very similarly. Actually, let's just do normal delay. It's easier to read for. I'll bring the feedback down, maybe. Maybe 2. Honestly, the 8th note, it's really simple, but it sounds kind of cool. Maybe filter out the delay a little bit. Getting something kind of cool here. Now, like this little click guy, I can tell a lot of the clickier stuff, it's like the more psychedelic stuff. And part of why that works is when you make like resonant filters on clicks, like in the most extreme version of this, like you'd recognize this sound in like psytrance stuff or something, but I could do a slow down effect of just this really short click. And we'll do something kind of like not this extreme, but just for like context. You could have it like start from a really fast rate, very similar to the delay trick where it's like starting at a really fast one and then, right, like this is a very classic like psi type sound. You can make the click really tight on the sampler. And that's just using the arpeggiator with the rate. So typically when they do stuff like this, they'll have like a bandpass filter or something. This is like Psi 101 Gorble. So like, I'm not gonna go that level, but we could do something just kind of like nodding to that. So like, say I have just a delay and this bandpass guy. I'm gonna use an echo for this because it's just, they basically took all the things that they should have added to the delay in Ableton and put them in there, so you don't have to do fancy tricks. So what we're looking at is a quarter note. All right, we're gonna do instead of a quarter note, we'll split it so it's like a dotted 8th note and a quarter note. That's a really classic. If you do a split delay, it's a really common one. Let's see. And I'm gonna have this bandpass thing sort of just like moving around and yeah. And maybe I just want this like trippy thing to be like every other, so I could automate it on and off. Which sounds like this. Generally, clicky perk sounds will sound nice with like resonant filter stuff. This could be also like a low pass filter, for instance. You get similar results. And then say I wanted to like start arranging this. If I duplicate it out a bunch, this, I mean, just like how I did it in this last one, I think I just did that like pitch thing. Oh, doesn't like that. In Ableton, you can quickly duplicate time by selecting space and hit Command Shift D. Command Shift in Ableton is like the project level duplication. You can do Command Shift I. Oh, no, it's just Command I, sorry. Command I to insert time, stuff like that. So it's a fast way to like, you have a loop that's like a half bar, and you just like duplicate it out to a bar, then duplicate those 2 bars, and now we're at 8 bars. But now let's take that delay thing that I did on whatever channel, if I can find it, this one. Kill. Let's just sanity check. All right, so I'm gonna like try and tune it by ear. I think it's around there. Yeah, 11.5. So like, I'll typically do something like that. I'll first like figure out what it is, so I could have that like automate up over time. So let's get the full. Duplicate everything out again so I can kind of like mess around with it, but yeah. So let's say this is like a sort of build up section, have the feedback come up. So that's loud. But then say we have I'm going to keep it loud just so we can hear it for now. And then I could have it go from 11.5 maybe all the way down an octave. So it goes all the way down to 23. Yeah, 20, quick math. And then I'll have it like end at 23. I like, for a lot of my effects, I like them to not end at the end of the phrase, but like end a little bit early, so I can like loop that last bar. It's like a fun sort of like trope of minimal stuff where like, rather than there being like some fill or something, it's just like it'll just do something in the last bar, and then that'll just start looping, and then like something changes, and then last bar something happens, and that loops. And a lot of old school minimal tracks like Geyser era minus stuff, it's very typical. So let's hear that, and then I'll deal with the volume being aggressive. And so this is maybe too much feedback, but what's cool is so I like to do a lot of kind of like gate techniques to get more groove in my sound. So for instance, if I just took these are kind of like the groovy notes in it. So I'm just going to record these really quick. In Ableton, it's fast. You can set resampling on, which is right at the top next to external in. All resampling means is that it's just listening to the current master output and recording that into a channel. So you don't have to like set up the ins on a specific channel. But I'm just doing this to get a little groove, you know, like my own personal perk loop. And in Ableton, you can do this with the gate, but Logic actually has a better interface for this, which is also a gate mechanism. But the general idea is you set it to sidechain, which you guys are maybe familiar with sidechaining with compression. That's the more common use. And that's basically when you have something pulling out of the mix, the volume going down, when something else plays. So the common one is when the kick plays, a bunch of things are like pulsing away, and then they pulse back in after, which helps with both the mix down being full, the kick being like full in the mix, but also gives you like a pulse. Gate sidechain is going to turn, it does the opposite. So it's going to turn something on when that happens. So for instance, if I did it when this thing gets all long and annoying. Here, let's see. sometimes you gotta dial these in. Sidechain, 35. So I would set this like long ringing sample. This one is going to be sidechained to my new perk loop. I'll call it perk loop. And I'm actually going to mute it because I already have it playing. This is literally just so that it's like I can see it in audio, and I just want I want this sound to turn on when this sound turns on. So let's hear that. So, and you have access to release, which is like a tail. So, and we could put all of this on in Ableton. It's great. Like in Logic, you normally would do this with like a send and return. But Ableton, I could have it, if you group a bunch of effects together, like select them onto the top and hit Command G, there's this little 3-line guy here. This is your chains, which basically just means you can copy the channel inside the channel. So it'd be like if I duplicated this channel and then deleted some shit or something. But that could be really, you just get a lot of channels eventually if you're doing this a lot. So like my thought was I'll have one version that's just without the ringing, just always doing this. But then we have this effects one, which back to when we were looking at the other stuff that I had already done. This is the same sort of thing, right? Whatever this is. No, I feel like that's not what it was. Oh no, it was this one. Sorry. This same concept, right? I have one that's moving, one that's pitching, and one that's just staying the same. So I'll do the same thing here. Okay, so let's just listen to these all together. Cool. And obviously add kick and sub because it makes everything better. So now that ring is coming in. Maybe I could just loop that for the next bit. Again, back to that trope where they catch something in the last bar and then they just loop it. Sounds a lot cooler once you hear where it came from, right? Like you hear it's like coming down and then it again, simple sound on its own, but listening to its progression and then it loops something simple and then it sounds a lot cooler looped simple as opposed to I just brought it in randomly. It's just like DJing where you like bring in a loop from a new song and it comes in all affected and whatnot, and then you like pull out effects and just like the clean loop feels good. So yeah, this would be, I mean, this is already pretty far along, and it's yeah, we took like 5 chops. It was like a K sound, second K sound, an S, a CH, and then like just you're going like and you can think of these also like when you're doing vocal chop grabs, like different vowels, like for different parts of a melody. So you get an O, E, etc. If you're doing it for yourself, it's actually much easier because you could just like track each one a couple different ways. If it's someone else recording, they probably aren't thinking that way. So yeah. Yeah. Any thoughts on this stuff that I just went through? Questions? It honestly sounds not that different from this track's like drum idea. So yeah, you can get really far pretty quickly with those. So in terms of the next steps that I had on like trying to write something, I think it's really helpful to group a bunch of your stuff out, and so you're not looking at very many channels. If you do have a lot of channels, some people, especially Logic, when I have worked in Logic more, I'm more like, it encourages more like drum rack use, I think, and like stock instruments, because they're just like really good in Logic. But I do a lot of audio manipulation, which means I have a lot of channels. So my general thoughts with that is grouping them all together when they're similar, and trying to sort of really separate the important ideas from the like auxiliary ideas. Because then when I'm duplicating things out, I can like duplicate out just the auxiliary ideas, or I know when a lead is going to come in, because, well, in this case, these are all stemmed where the colors are still there. But in a normal file that I would have, for instance, these vocals are separated. So like, there's not just a bunch of empty space. So like, I would like see, of course I did this in a channel that I was using for, I'm going to save that as like a vocal drum example. I'll go back to the original organization. So yeah, if I have, this is like how I organize nearly everything, which is relatively, you can see, I could have a ton of channels in here, but I'm really looking at like not that many. So I'll have like my kick and bass in a separate group. Sometimes that helps for processing and making things beefier, especially with like techno stuff. If you want to do some like group compression, distortion, careful distorting kicks generally. But some small wins, at least in Ableton, you could do, I think these two things sound nice on like most low-end stuff. You can do just a tiny amount of overdrive. Overdrive, there is an equivalent in Logic, which I don't recall the name, but the general concept of that is, it's called like enharmonic distortion, which means it just adds kind of like noise, like frequency in that area, and it's non-discriminatory. So the difference is saturators, like Ableton saturator is a harmonic saturator. So it's actually listening to the input signal and is looking for harmonics or resonant peaks. For low end, harmonic saturation often will make it more audible on the top end, but if you want, but it also makes the low end, which is the important part, in my opinion, worse. So careful doing that. If you do any of it, do very small amounts of it. We're talking like 3 or 4% on almost any plugin that I would do this with. Overdrive, oh yeah, I might do a little down here, and then autofilter has a mode called PRD that I like. It's kind of hidden here, where it says clean. They basically spent a fuck ton of money buying the DSP off of people that emulated hardware filters. Honestly, like Pioneer, the reason why they got like that Opus, you can tell they changed the UI on it because they want to show that they're using like the V10 filter type vibe. People care about the filter sound. I know there's probably zone snobs in here. So they added this. They have 4 other types of filters that are all just different low passes. And you'll notice that a drive knob pops up here when you pick one of these other ones. Let me just like make, is it like a good size? Is this better? Maybe, yeah. Yes, oh, you can set it to PRD here and add like a little like 2-3 dB. And that tends to like those two things are like really like small wins, but generally looking at low end, if you want to make things fatter, as a quick mix tip, only do small wins. I'm not extreme with any processing that I do. It's really getting good source material, which in this song is a sub 37, and I don't know about the kick. I steal a lot of kicks, so it's entirely possible that's where they came from, but I couldn't tell you where.
She's on your mind.
Or I won't tell you where. Anyways, okay, so leads. There's one other lead in here. Actually, there's two other leads in here, which are like, this goes back to like the like songwriting, like from a pop perspective, it sounds like weird, like applying it to a sound like this. But like, I have like a verse section, and then I would take, say, some random vocal pieces, especially the line "She's on Your Mind," and get like some trippy delay type resample effects, which there's a million different ways you can go about doing this. So it's kind of a dark hole to go into for a short class. But here's like some examples. And then yeah, looks like I have a little bit. Yeah. Somehow I made that with the vocal. So they're like kind of an assorted grouping of them. But these are covering the same amount of time as the vocal verse. So it's kind of like there's a 16 bar verse, which is actually just an 8-bar verse and space. So like I'll have the line play and then there's space for a bit. Line play, space for a bit. If it was a pop song, it would probably be 8 bars because they'd have it just continue the whole time. But it's important to leave space for groove in tracks like this. So even in this section, there's some space sort of in between the bits. Oh. Here. Ah, yes. So. And then the last thing that's like a lead is this Jupiter, which is now bounced to audio, which is unfortunate, but this is on my laptop. I have a studio machine at home this is a much more complicated channel. General idea though is the Jupiter emulator from Roland Cloud. Roland Cloud's got some really nice emulations, especially if you like, I think the Jupiter and the Juno are really good. The other ones are pretty good. But you can get a lot of interesting results with, I have like a Moog filter that I paid for that's like, let's see if I have any version of this. I think I have a Filter Mini. This is like a Moog filter. But what this would look like in the Ableton filter is just, there's a lot of these guys going on. So it's a band reject or notch filter. And they're moving around. So in Ableton, you'd bring up an LFO knob here. And I also have them, again, I did this with the Moog, so it's a slightly different interface, but down here you have this like spin knob. Spin, it'll be very obvious in headphones. Let's see if it's obvious here. Like, it'll sort of move around your head. Honestly, more down here, it might be more obvious. I don't know how good our stereo is in here, but this is a great technique for having synths where you don't care that much about the like low end. Again, the stereo stuff is probably better more in the top end of it, but I'm using a number of these and like a saw wave that I'm doing a lot of automated envelopes on. But coming up with the melody structure for this, this was actually the first time I started doing an approach like this, but I've since done this with a lot of stuff where like I will take it completely out of project again. Very similarly to how the track started, where I just bounced out like a loop and sent it for vocal tracking. And a lot of times I might do all that vocal stuff I just showed you guys, like with the vocal drums, in a separate project, just like get it into a tight groove, and maybe I'll bounce it out or render it to audio, so then I'm just like not looking at it when I get to arrangement phase, because it just is what it is. And, it helps zen your mind for arrangement mode. But yeah, I actually just found this in here. I was on a retreat in Spain, and I did this on this computer because I had to use a laptop. But I will wait. Save 1.5. Okay. Yeah. Good. Yeah. So like I'll pull out just literally I'll render the audio of like a whole idea that I'm working on. This is again on like the more melodic tip for this other album thing I'm doing. You can kind of hear the like lower bass line, MIDI bass. Bum 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 bum. So I like would figure out the MIDI of that. Presumably I already had the MIDI in the other project, but I think I had to redo it. But for reference, it'd be like this sound, zeroed. It's doing a couple complicated things so make things less obvious. Okay, so I had access to a mini Moog there, which is very expensive and honestly kind of a piece of shit, but it sounds really good. It's like very testy to get anything in key or sounding good, but when it does, it sounds very like vintage. So I'll get the MIDI, and then I'll do like a big hardware jam, because I have like a couple different hardware pieces, but you could do this more for the sake of getting a bunch of audio resample as well, which I did a lot for this, for On Your Mind. And I had a approach in that song that I wrote like half of the melody, and the other half of the melody, I kind of like, again, this is the same thing. It's you write something, duplicate it, change it a little, but in the second half of each of the melody lines, I'll show kind of the basic approach. Is you'd like write a melody. This is the very simple melody, and then in the second half, I used some combination of MIDI effects. So in Ableton, it's called like a random, but Logic, they have the exact same. Actually, again, Logic's is much better, but this is basically choosing a random note between 1 and 12. And this song is C sharp minor, I think. So you use a scale lock, which is a great MIDI effect. Again, Logic's is better, but this one's not bad. So the combination of these two things together, C sharp minor. So what this does first we'll listen to it without it, which will sound much worse. Because it's just picking any note up to 12 different options, each one semitone, meaning it's just playing random notes on a single octave on a keyboard. With a key lock like this one, it will be at least in key. Now, I don't have to have the chance as much, and I could set it to by, for instance, instead of add. And it'll do both the octave below and the octave above. So if I have these effects kind of like grouped, and I could have, every other bit turn on. Sometimes you get some good results. Sometimes you get some weird results. But I kind of went through, and interestingly, people think about resampling audio. You can also resample MIDI. How are we doing on time? 808? Cool. All right, easy. So yeah, I would record basically, like, I'm generally a lot of my like musical ideas, even if I write the melody, there's something very like inspiring about having some aspect of chaos that like allows the idea to emerge. So I like doing sort of like random type stuff like this, and would record what's going on with it, which in this case, it'll show you essentially what these decisions are. And so a lot of my ideas will have like moments of smart random effects like this. And then I go through afterwards and I listen to all of it. When I was a stoner, I would literally just like smoke a joint and like listen to like hours of this stuff and just like pick favorite takes. I'm like, I've learned I can just like spend a little more time making it a smarter random thing, so I don't have to do that. But this is a general trope of how I can get some things that are like, for me, I think I second guess, especially melodies, but just like ideas generally, if like it's completely me trying to do exactly what's in my head all the time. And it's almost more fun to play listener in the studio when you can, which you won't get that opportunity very often, but random stuff, or just kind of like throwing a couple ideas up like I did with the vocal chops without really listening to where they were yet. I try and do that stuff a lot. So then I just am more a listener, and I can be like, well, that sounds bad. That should be moved over. As opposed to the one being like, well, what if they all have to be here and here and here? I think that the calculated approach should be used. It should be used as I mean, obviously you have to, but like avoid it when you can. It keeps things fun, and being a listener makes you make better decisions, I think. So yeah, that's kind of like how I approach sort of each of the ideas in this. I realized we didn't get into like the weeds on any of this stuff, but it does kind of show you basic structure of these elements. You can get a lot out of a little. For me, a lot of that comes from vocals, but you can do this with hardware or, synths and DAW, drums, whatever. But yeah, I hope this has been helpful. Do you guys have any questions unrelated to this? Just thoughts. We generally, looks like we were going to do some Q&A for a bit. Is this correct? Or are we, what's our timing? Yeah? Kind of like unrelated stuff. We don't have to do, about a specific project or anything. Yeah? Totally. Yeah. Okay. So there's this guy who released my first EP ever, Stranger. He is like, at the time, he was like late 40s, early 50s, major stoner from Orange County. And we were like working on a track. He's been writing for years. Like, he was actually one of the reasons Skrillex came to the States. He had like an old like dubstep project. And like, he's like clearly learned his tricks, you know, and we were working for a while, but I was mostly working on the track, and I was like kind of pissed because like he was in the back just like chilling, and then I was in this position. I was working on a 16-bar loop for like way too long, and he just comes up and he essentially does this. I'm like, I can't figure out what to do, and he just takes, well, in Ableton you can do it this way, but he essentially finds just a half-bar loop. I felt like, and literally just duplicate that out. Find one that you like, obviously, and jam over that. And it literally made the track so sick in like 10 minutes. I like just twisted a couple lead ideas to like follow the new like more like hypnotic thing or something. But like generally it becomes, the longer you work on something and the more you're like stuck, especially earlier on in writing, like you start throwing more and more ideas at it and like arranging more and more ideas out longer and longer, and going back to just like a small groove, which often are grooves that maybe you were not intending to like have play that often. A lot of my favorite songs just as a DJ basically sound like that for like long periods, and then like they'll have just like a lead like blast in. And if you're writing for a while, you don't write like that. Most people, not you, like just generally you want to kind of like fill the space and like play something at every moment, and that just generally doesn't work, and will happen almost always if you are just like muscling your way through a song. So yeah, it was very effective the first time he did it. It doesn't always work like that, obviously, but I was like, okay, this is an old guy that's been doing this for a long time, and he clearly doesn't have to work nearly as hard on his songs when he has tricks like that. So that's a good one. Other stuff? Actually, wait, one more that I really like, because I don't have a like instrumental background or like for a while theory background. I've like tried to learn more, is I love jamming over music that I love, with like a synth, or if you have like a keyboard or whatever your thing is, push, figure out the key and just listen to something that you enjoy the musical structure of, and jam over it while recording the MIDI, and then get rid of the song and just work from there, because it's inspired by, obviously. Don't just be like repeating all the melodies over and over. The idea is just being in the key with it and like the movement of it. It's a really nice trope. It's like, it's very easy to get something that you'll find inspiring, and no one will know, especially if you pitch it down like 2 steps. And I think everybody at some granularity copies everything, so it doesn't really matter. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Totally. Well, I'd say that it literally not until this year have I just sent an email cold to a label, and they were just like, word, we'll sign it. Like, that typically doesn't happen. There's many sliding scales of how to do this depending on the scene and, for instance, how active they are on social media. Looking at platforms like Twitter and Instagram, and specifically for the A&R of that label, not the label Instagram. That's one that they probably, it depends on how big, if the label's small, maybe they are one and the same and they check both. But like finding the human behind the selection of the label and talking to them, maybe at more of a humble stage of just like, I'm like, first getting started, like, do you have any recommendations for me? And maybe they'll ask you for tunes just off the bat. Also keep it like, good rule is like 2 to 3 tracks maximum. And it's great if you have 1 or 2 more that you didn't send them that you also like, in case they do really like it, because they pretty much always are like, yeah, do you have any more? And also they pretty much always like the one that you didn't think that they would like, which is not the one you probably sent. So that's the other weird part, is if you do get trust with them, do not presume that you know what they like. They actually listen to their genre and their sound so much more than all of us do, that they might be more preferring something that is like different from their label sound, which doesn't make sense because like it's their sound. But it's like, if you get to be someone that helps push their sound forward, they like you more almost, because it's like their chance to kind of like enter a new foray. And I've just, not only for my own stuff, but when I've like tried to convince my friends to finally release music, I've made them always send me bigger bags at first, and then I'll like cut them down. But yeah, don't send them a bunch of stuff, and yeah, find the human, I'd say, it's a lot easier. And mix the track down. Like they, depending on how big the label is, it's like, yeah, it doesn't have to be completely finished, but like they're likely first gonna listen to it for like 1 second at the drop. I mean, you guys are DJs, or a lot of you are. When you go on Beatport, like, let's be real, like you might literally just click like just skip to the drop, like listen to like 2 seconds. They do that first. If they like it, then they're like, okay, what's up with the rest of the song? But if the mixdown isn't like at a certain level, that it's like, obviously they can fix some of it and whatnot, but that, yeah, it needs to be at least somewhat like, yeah, put it in a master chain, even if it's just a limiter, something. Cool. Yep. Okay, last question. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I actually kind of intentionally skipped a little, only because like I am much more hardware for specifically my bass lines, and I don't want people to get the impression that that's a necessity. Like I've gotten away with, like, I use Operator a lot too. Reactor has a great VST Razor that sounds really fat, and I generally try and keep very simple pattern with very small changes, right? This sounds like it's a loop, the on your mind bass, but there's a ton of small variations, which it goes back to the same thing with like the drums and whatnot, where you duplicate it, just slightly change it, maybe remove one note each time you duplicate it. But it's a similar process in MIDI, and then I would run that into hardware and record it. But you could just do that with Operator or Razor, or the ones that I prefer. And these are nowadays mostly like filtered saw wave or square waves that are very low filters, so you can get a little bit at the top end. Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much. I'm sure I keep track of time.
Yeah, no, totally.
Thank you.
Awesome. Was this helpful? Thanks for hanging out. That was really fun. Cool. Yeah, I was glad that the live demo for the drum thing actually sounded cool. It's not always true.
Thank you so much. Sammy, can you tell everyone where they can find you, find your music?
I mean, all platforms, Spotify, Bandcamp, I get more money if it's on there, so definitely hit it with that. And SoundCloud, I have the most stuff because some of it I technically shouldn't have up there. So, but yeah, all platforms, yeah.
And thank you so much. If you registered, you should be getting I'm going to double check. You should be getting an email from the Sound Collective with some offers and freebies to get some to get connected with the online platform. So if some of these things, like some of the things you said to me, were a little over my head as a novice producer, but I did take some notes on things. So if you, whatever level you are, the Sound Collective has a lot of resources for you. And thank you to Sammy for this workshop, and Georgie from Liminal Collective, and I'm from Sisters in Sound. So if you want to look both of us up, she's Liminal Collective on Instagram and Sisters in Sound with underscores on Instagram.
Yeah, I have one thing. I also have been putting together a ton of videos online, none of which are up yet because I'm like making them organized, but that will be something on the horizon in the spring this year. So if you want to see more of that stuff, just look at my socials, which is Sammy Legs on everything, or it's Sammy Legs on Twitter. Thanks.